Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Marc-Antoine. Very pleased to introduce this great panel on an absolutely fundamental issue: energy security, affordable and competitive energy, and of course, decarbonized energy for the world. I work at the French Institute for International Affairs. I run the energy and climate team there. And when we look at the world, we see a tale of two stories, basically. On the one hand, the energy system still has a strong inertia. We still have a growth in oil demand, we still have a growth in gas demand, and we might finally see a peak in coal demand, but a peak that is at a very, very high level, right? Nonetheless, we now have global clean tech investment level on a yearly basis twice bigger than fossil fuel investments. And this is rising year by year. And if I look at the annual deployment levels of clean technologies, we are really beating every record every year. So it's a remarkable growth. And as we speak, 80% of electricity investment are renewables and low carbon electricity investment. So it's absolutely remarkable. Almost nobody still invests into coal. So that is a remarkable development, but the problem is the climate urgency is there. Everything that has been done is not enough. 1.5 degrees warming limitation is out of reach. So we have to focus on still continued mitigation plus adaptation. And if we look at one of the reasons why most likely we are not there yet, because we are in a fragmented world. We have very few carbon markets. We have different sets of regulations or incentives, but in most countries there is nothing, right? Or almost nothing. So in this fragmented world, it's still very profitable to invest into fossil fuels and much less into clean techs, although that is improving. So the story we are going to discuss over the next hour together is, how do we push more low-carbon electrons in the energy systems? How do we push more low-carbon molecules in the energy systems? And how do we basically perform a greater system integration? That is, how can molecules help out to stabilize the electricity system, for example? And how can electricity help to decarbonize, for example, industries that we're running on fossil fuels? So that is the program for the next hour. I'm very, very pleased that we have a great panel, very diverse, both from geographical origins and from stakeholder perspective. And so I'm very, very pleased that we have the representative of the United Arab Emirates to the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, which is based here, headquartered here in Abu Dhabi. Excellency, you are the representative of your country to that major organization, Dr. Naval Al-Hosani. Perhaps you could tell us to start with, we had a year ago a fundamentally important COP taking place at Dubai, where expectations were huge, and I think the results were tremendous in many aspects. So, and one of the commitments at COP was to multiply by 3 the deployment of renewable energy sources. And so perhaps you could tell us, in your view, and especially as you follow and as you participate to the governance of this important organization that aims to foster global renewable deployment worldwide, and it has a global membership, unlike the IEA, right? So perhaps you could tell us how you see the perspectives, what needs to be done, and what makes you optimistic at the end, and where we all need to do a bit more of work. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. First, thank you for having me here. It's such an honor to be among such esteemed speakers and to participate in a very, very important conversation. And the topic is, as we just mentioned, is extremely critical at the time we are living. I also am very proud to be contributing to the diversity aspect of this conference. I heard I'm only the 3rd female speaker today, so I feel extremely embarrassed on behalf of you guys, but I'm proud of that. Thank you. I'm a member of a very important community, which is, as you mentioned, we hosted here a year ago, COP28. But we are host of IRENA, and being a host of IRENA puts huge, basically, responsibility, but also optimism, because if we as a world agree to create such an organization, so we understand the importance of diversification of our energy sources. IRENA, even before COP28, in their World Energy Transition Outlook, they outlined the importance of renewables in the race towards basically maintaining our path in line with 1.5 degrees. And that was extremely important and became one of the reasons that at COP28 presidency, we did announced that very ambitious target, which is tripling renewables and doubling efficiency by 2030. And that target, as you mentioned, made its way as Article 28 in UAE consensus. Now, what does IRENA do, and what do we need to do as member state to make this happen? So IRENA in its report was actually not only by COP28, but also by the G20, was assigned to track the progress on where we are. So 133 countries signed that pledge of tripling renewables and doubling energy efficiency, and IRENA now is monitoring this progress. And the first report was launched in pre-COP29 a few months ago. And of course, we know that we are not on the right track to achieve, because according to IRENA numbers, and excuse me if I'm going to refer to my notes, in 2023, you mentioned why I'm optimism. In 2023, we added 473 gigawatt of renewables. So the total capacity that we have now is 3,865 gigawatt. But we need, by 2030, to align with our 1.5, we need 11.174 gigawatt. So the gap is quite hard. So if we should be adding 1,044 gigawatts per year for us to achieve this target. So although we are very far from where we need to be, but we are definitely moving in the right direction. Maybe a little bit slower than what we should, but I guess once we know and once we see the numbers, we are gonna, I'm optimistic that we are gonna correct path, because to your point, the fastest growing sector is renewables. Technology is advancing, cost is dropping, and we see more and more solutions into that. Your question about what IRENA does to keep us all on the right track. In the report, the tracking report, there are five pillars that we all need to make sure that we pay enough attention to for us to achieve the targets. Of course, and it goes without saying, the most important is finance. We need to finance energy transition, and we need to scale up and expand this distribution of finance. The supply chain, skills, and capacity is extremely important, because we definitely need a skilled workforce to achieve the energy transition. The infrastructure and the system operation, that basically some will require modernization, some will require expansion, and other will require smart operation. And this is where IRENA and platforms like these play an important thing. The fourth pillar is international cooperation. We cannot, not one country can do that alone, and that's why the tripling target is not on country per country, but it's a global target, and we need to globally work towards achieving that. And one of the most important pillars, which I think this platform can contribute to successfully or in an important way, is the policy and regulation. We, as a host country, but also as a member state, we keep supporting IRENA to achieve and advance and support countries in those three pillars. We support with finance through some of our platforms that we launched with IRENA, such as Energy Transition Accelerator Finance Platforms, ETAF. We also funded IRENA help countries, 20 developing countries, develop their NDCs and many other initiatives that we do. So NDCs is very important because NDC 3 is, as some of you may be aware, are due by 2025, and that is going to help us check where we are and help us in tracking our global stocktake.
Many thanks for these information. When I listen to you, I think it's very, very important to underline that you have also identified the fact that we need the entire value chain, and actually it's a battle for the entire electricity system that has a lot of components in there. And of course, you need access to finance, but you need the grids, you need the power, electronic, etc., and of course the skills and the manforce, and that is lacking in many countries. So clearly, these bottlenecks need to be addressed. Can I ask you? So, what's exactly the situation in your country? You have, of course, a growing energy demand, especially electricity demand, not least for, of course, air conditioning. Water desalination, you have a strong economic growth, manufacturing, expansion, etc., etc. So how are the renewables being developed in your country, and are you confident that you will be able to ramp up fast?
I think the one thing that we have, and many times we miss it, which is we have an incredibly visionary leadership. Our journey when renewables started, you know, when it wasn't even fashionable, when people were not even looking at renewables, we created Masdar Initiative back in 2006. Today, we have 3 of the largest, lowest cost solar plants in the world. So our journey with renewables started and much earlier when we used to call it some of the technologies that we adapted were, and Frank remembers that very well, it was bleeding edge, not even cutting edge technologies, but most of those have now materialized and became even commercially viable and very competitive. We are extremely confident that we are on the right track to our own tripling targets, which is basically because of our commitment now. As in 2022, our installed capacity was 3.1 gigawatt. Mainly solar, clearly, but by 2024, we have already doubled this to 6 gigawatts, and by 2030, our aim is to achieve 14.2 gigawatts. So our overall target of clean energy is almost 20 gigawatts, including 5.6 gigawatts of nuclear power that we are already investing in. So looking into all our stakeholders, everybody's aligned towards that target, and we have, you know, very strong companies. I think you just mentioned as you were coming in, we have Taqa, we have Adjunct, we have Masdar. They are all collaborating together in different ventures to accelerate the process of advancing renewables, but also new technologies such as hydrogen production for national and international. So. You know, with Masdar in 18 years, which is a very young age for a company like Masdar, we are now in 40 countries. They're installed in 6 continents, and their combined capacity is 31.5 gigawatt worldwide. So when it comes to renewables, to be honest, I'm not very concerned. The only thing that maybe we are a little bit concerned about, and not only, I guess, here, but globally, is energy efficiency, because it looks like it's really the orphan. Nobody really looks at it in a systematic way. And this is why we at the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure announced we are going to create an alliance, which is Global Energy Efficiency Alliance, to drive, in collaboration, hopefully with IRENA and other partners, to drive efforts in energy efficiency through, again, knowledge sharing, capacity, building capacity, but also having the right network in place to work on that.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Al-Hosani, thank you also indeed for reminding that it's not all supply side driven.
Demand
energy policy has to be balanced, and in many countries in the world, the demand side aspect is neglected for various reasons, but it plays a critical role. Thank you so much. May I turn now to, that deserves an applause.
Thank you.
May I turn to Stéphane Michel. Stéphane, you are a member of the executive committee of TotalEnergies, and you encompass the need to work both on molecules and on electrons and in intertwining them per your functions. And your CEO, Patrick Pouyanné, has been extraordinarily present and active at the two past COPs, notably pushing a deal on reducing fugitive methane emissions. So perhaps to start with and continuing on our conversation, perhaps you could tell us, what takeaways do you, have on your list from these COPs in your investment plans, and how do you concretely translate that into investment projects?
Two good questions. Thank you. Good afternoon. I think that COP28 was indeed a very important COP because for the first time, the West, the Global South, and the oil and gas company discuss without taboo of one of the key questions, which is what is the place of fossil fuel in that transition. And thanks to the leadership of Sultan Al-Jaber, we come with, at the same time, a pragmatic plan and an ambitious one, with the idea that we should speed up the transition, invest more money, be much faster because we are not at the pace where we should be. And at the same time, respect the legitimate right of Global South to use their fossil resource to develop themselves, because they actually need that, especially Africa. That's one. Then when you look at the outcome, I believe there are three interesting ideas. The first one is clearly triple the amount of gigawatt of renewable energy produced by 2030, which means to at least double the pace at which we do that. That's one. Second, acknowledging the role of gas in that transition, because today, as you mentioned, we continue to increase the consumption of coal and we continue to invest in coal-fired plants, which is the total absurdity when you know the difference. And third, ask the oil and gas industry to work on decarbonizing its production, which actually now 54 companies have agreed to do, signing a chart on the oil and gas decarbonization charter. Actually, Patrick Pouyanné is currently chairing that group, and that group represents already 50% of the industry, with plenty of national company and with concrete action to improve the emission of the industry and notably to reduce the methane emission to go to zero. So this COP was very important. Baku was interesting in the sense that we make progress on the Article 6 and the way we can use credit, but I would say that clearly the one in Abu Dhabi was key. Has it inspired our strategy? I would say no, because we changed our name from Total in TotalEnergies back a few years ago, and our strategy was clearly to say we can't stick with what we do, fossil fuel. We need at the same time to build a new pillar based on the integrated power and renewables. But it clearly reinforced our strategy, which is consistent with that aim. And just to give a few examples, so we will reach 28 gigawatts of renewables this year, of renewable worldwide. We'll be at 35. We are on track to reach 100 gigawatts of renewable by 2030. And we are notably quite active here in this region, in Oman, in Qatar. Not in Abu Dhabi, because Masdar doesn't need us to do the job, but present as well in Saudi. And if I go a bit further, we are building currently in India, with our partners, the largest solar plant in the world, 20 gigawatts. That's just amazing. It's six nuclear plant on the single site. So it's taking place, and that's 4 billion of investment per year. But at the same time, can't be only renewable. Needs to be gas as well, and decarbonized gas. And I'm glad to say that we are currently building a small plant, but a nice one, 1 million tons of LNG in Oman, fully decarbonized, using electricity coming from solar panel, 300 megawatt solar plant, and that will be the lowest emitting LNG plant in the world, and so the lowest gas. And what it will be used for bunker LNG, to allow the maritime industry to switch from current fossil fuel to LNG, improving their own emission. So clearly, those scope, reaffirming where we should go is an inspiration for the strategy we put in place.
Many thanks. So basically, that involves working, of course, with all the different molecules. And when we mention molecules, I should have perhaps precise that we're talking about natural gas that is progressively decarbonized, either via biomethane or via carbon capture and storage, if there are related emissions. But you can also have, of course, hydrogen, and we'll talk about that in a second, because there's different types and sorts of hydrogen. Now, perhaps could you tell us a bit more, you know, what is for you, perhaps one or two flagship investment projects that combine this ability to deliver, you know, both on the molecule and on the electron front. You mentioned the extraordinary investment in India, in solar, that is remarkable. By the way, India wants to be also a hydrogen giant, and maybe there are opportunities related to that. But one thing that has been coming up over the past 2-3 years in terms of importance as a solution is carbon capture and storage or reutilization. I mean, do you also have this on your toolbox, and what are you doing in this field?
Yeah, for sure. You need to do so, because you will, in 2050, you will continue to use oil and gas, and you will continue to emit CO2. So that CO2, if you really want to be net zero, needs to be stored somewhere. That's why it's important to develop the CCS industry that has started in Europe with one project in Norway, to which we participate with Equinor and Shell, and where we are, it's starting now, where we are going to store CO2 captured from the European industry, liquefied, transport by shipping, and then stored in depleted field in Norway. We have as well acquired several acreage in the US to try to do exactly the same thing. So that's one for CCS. Then the bulk of the transition is electricity, and how the world's going to move to electricity. Actually, we are as well a shareholder of a battery gigafactory in Europe for EV, because you need to think about the production, but you need as well to think to the demand. And if we are not able to reduce the cost of that transition on the demand side, that's not going to work. So that's an important point. And the first one, as you mentioned, is to produce the molecules in a different way. So for that, you have one using the biomass and to produce biofuel. And we are transforming our refinery one after the other in plants to process biofuel. That's already the case in France, notably in Lavera and in Grandpuits. And then you have the question of can you use electricity to produce molecules to decarbonize? That's the famous question of green hydrogen, I believe my colleague will discuss. On our side, we want to decarbonize all the hydrogen of our refinery. That's 500,000 KT by 2030, and that's why we have launched a big tender to be able to purchase that hydrogen. So we are going to source it partly from Saudi Arabia, partly for our own production. And we have a project in Europe, big project of 2,000 megawatt and 57 megawatt in France, in Netherlands, of electrolyzer to produce green hydrogen, transform that in, to produce green hydrogen and use that in our refinery to decarbonize that production.
Thank you. We'll be able to dig into that later, because I'm sure there will be questions. But as we are addressing the issue of hydrogen, perhaps let me take 1 second to explain to the audience that hydrogen, you don't find it on the ground, you don't find it in the air. It is an energy vector. The bulk of hydrogen consumed and produced today in the world is very carbon intensive. It comes from coal, it comes from gas. So it's a large share of global greenhouse gas emissions. So there is an opportunity to clean this hydrogen, but there's also an opportunity to use more hydrogen and to produce more for new users. And one of these users is energy storage. And I'm turning now to Frank Wouters. Thanks for being with us today. You are the president of the Hydrogen Alliance for the MENA region. There is a huge issue when we talk about low-carbon hydrogen. Everyone needs to understand, which is that it has multiple potential utilizations, but one thing needs to be made very clear is the certification that it is really low carbon. And there's different ways of producing it, so if we want to make sure all across the world that we are talking about the same product, we need to have common rules. But before we enter this topic, perhaps you could tell us, based on your latest study, about how hydrogen can be stored and how to basically improve the flexibility of energy systems, building on various technologies, but I'm sure as well hydrogen. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, the study was a little bit broader because what we really wanted to understand was the role and the size of storage. Because, even though I wrote a book on batteries in the 90s and I was the president of the Long Duration Energy Storage Council for several years, and I've made investments in, in solar thermal projects in Spain with molten salt storage. I always had this nagging feeling that I didn't really have the big picture on the role of storage and what it means in an energy system. So last year we started a project and we started looking into it. And the first thing that shocked me was actually nobody knows. So now we know because we did the research, but there was not the IEA, not IRENA, not McKinsey. Nobody actually knew how much storage we have, in the world to make the energy system function. And then the second question is, why do you have storage? The first reason why you have storage, it's obvious to match supply and demand. It's a technical requirement. That is what you understand. If you think about storage, and that's also what the modelers understand, which is important because the other two reasons for storage they actually don't understand, or at least they don't take it into account. So the modeling, that was the second finding. So first, nobody has the overview. Secondly, the modeling is wrong because they don't look at storage from a system perspective. So the other two reasons why you have storage is it's obvious. We have strategic reserves. I mean, the IEA, since 1970s, we have 90 days of strategic petroleum reserves. Since this year, the European Union mandates that 90% of your gas storage has to be full on the 1st of November because of the Russia issue and the Ukraine war, etc. So strategic reserves are significant. And the third one is also obvious. It's trade. People buy molecules when they're cheap, and then they sell them when they're more expensive. And that adds up to quite a significant amount of molecules. So when we did the numbers, you then find that, of course, there's a lot of people know everything about oil, then there's the gas people, you have the battery people, you have the coal people, but the aggregate added up to more than 20%. So more than 20% of all the molecules that we consume in a year is in storage for the three reasons that I just mentioned. If you then look at electricity storage, which is what everybody also understands, batteries and the growth of batteries and the critical minerals and all of that geopolitics around this, it's completely insignificant. And I mean, I'm on the board of Core Street Capital. We make investments in battery systems, so I know the markets and why you have batteries, etc. But in overall numbers, it's 0.03% of electricity consumption in a year, which is 30,000 terawatt hours. So you store 9.5. So batteries are not even part of that 9.5 terawatt hours. It's pumped hydro. And batteries are growing exponentially. So they will be bigger than pumped hydro in the future. But it's still going to be insignificant. Because then the next thing we did is we understood the massive amount of molecular storage, 3,000 times more than electricity storage, if you will. And the question is, okay, now we have to project a future that is clean. So we looked at various models. We looked at BP, very well documented. We looked at IRENA. I used to work at IRENA, so I looked at the World Energy Transition Outlook for 2050, latest by when we need to be clean. We need to not have any more emissions. And then we found that none of the models took storage into account. And the fact that, for example, now somebody mentioned that we have more than 80–85% of new additions for several years has been renewable. So that is growing exponentially. But still, the electricity system runs on molecules. 60% of electricity still generated using coal and natural gas. So you have a lot more clean electricity, the solar and wind, etc., but it's backed up by molecules. And then if you fast forward into the future, then it is very clear that we will have more electricity. I mean, nobody argues that it will be less than 50%. Right now, it's about 20–25. It will double or almost triple. So electricity is certainly going to be more because it's cheap and cost-effective to do, but it still requires molecules. And that is the major finding. We ran the numbers, we reduced the number of molecules in the electricity system, but still you end up with at least 2,000 times more molecules than batteries. And then the question is, okay, how do you do that without emissions? And that is where hydrogen comes in. So it is not a nice to have. Part of the narrative that I'm hearing, we have to do renewable electricity first, and then we do hydrogen because you have conversion losses and efficiencies and yada, 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 and it's difficult to store, and I don't know what. The question is, how are you going to build a system without it? And I don't see an answer. So we have to think in molecules. So storage is dominated by molecules now and in the future. And then we have to focus on cleaning up the molecules more than anything else. I mean, solar and wind, that is something that we know. We've done it, we know how to do that, just keep going, keep building, etc. It's cheap, cost effective, etc. But we need molecules, otherwise you cannot build a system that works.
So Frank, that's very convincing, and we need to optimize energy systems to reduce costs and improve efficiency and security. There's not unlimited money and capital resources and raw materials, etc., etc. But if we take the hydrogen economy, the future hydrogen economy, there's two big blocks that are leading in terms of ambition and in terms of industrial capabilities in this field. It's Japan. They were the front runners for various reasons we can discuss later on, and the Europeans. And if we look at Europe, it's fair to say that, because of rising energy costs, because of rising interest rates, because of political uncertainties, because of a number of problems, the ramp up of the hydrogen ecosystem has been slowed. Nonetheless, it remains critical to get there. So, what is needed now, in your view, in Europe, if we really want to, exactly do what you said, which is not have the sequencing, but have the two being developed together, the molecules and the electrons in this field?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, if you look at the European situation, and it's very similar in Japan, you're a net energy importer right now. And that will not change in the future. Even in a fully renewable energy future where you have all the bells and the whistles to make that work, you will still not be able to be self-sufficient in Europe and neither in Japan. So you need to look at imports. Then the question is, if you have an import dependency, you're going to have strategic reserves. That's why we have them right now for petroleum, and that's why you have this mandated storage situation for natural gas. There is no situation where I foresee, a future where you are replacing fossil fuels with cleaner molecules, where you don't have strategic reserves for those. Batteries again are insignificant. They're important, but they will not give you that security of supply. You want to have a strategic reserve because you want to reduce price shocks and guarantee, that the system works at any point in time. Then the question is, if you're going to have, first of all, a whole bunch of hydrogen and other clean molecules, and of course biomass is there, etc., why not build that strategic reserve now? As you rightly said, we're struggling to find a market mechanism and to get going. You have to get going to reduce costs. At the moment, the costs are still high. We know that we will be lower in the future if you deploy it at scale, etc. But you have to start, and the starting is at the moment the issue. Why not build a strategic reserve now? And there we did some numbers, and a realistic number for hydrogen in 2030 in the European Union is 6.8 million you know, the tons of, no, 6.8 million tons of hydrogen. And then if you take the numbers that we have right now, 25% of that, you know, you would already require hundreds of salt caverns deployed by that time. So, but it would provide an immediate, you know, mechanism for the projects that are there, because the projects are there. There's about 1,500 large-scale hydrogen projects that people have developed, but they don't, you know, find an immediate off-taker. If we start with a strategic reserve, which we were going to need anyway, you know, you have an immediate mechanism to actually get going. And then you get on the cost curve, and then you know, start getting into a market situation.
Thank you so much. Well, just to, you know, this 6.8 million tons, that will be a third of the current target.
Yeah, well, I mean, the target is an ambition. The 20 million tons, so the 10 and 10 imported and domestically produced, that's not hardwired.
Okay.
So what is hardwired is, you know, the Fit for 55, the gas package, you know, there's 1% in the fuels, etc. If you add those up, which are, you know, they're mandated, so the member states need to put them into national legislation, then you add up to somewhere between 4-point-something and 6.8. That is hard. That's a hard target. The others are ambitions and not really hardwired.
Okay, thank you. Let's continue on that. And I'm turning now to our last speaker, Mikaa Blugeon-Mered. You have many hats. And including working now for Hy24, a hydrogen specialized investment fund based in Paris. But among the many things that you did is you wrote a book about the geopolitics of hydrogen. And so hydrogen can be produced either locally, but it can also be transported in various forms, liquid or gaseous form. There's different costs and constraints related to that, but clearly we talk about hydrogen, but hydrogen has different forms and byproducts. It can be ammonia, methanol, to name a few. So do you have the impression that hydrogen trade could actually pick up before we do local hydrogen production? Because what we do now is generally small demonstrator scale hydrogen production, although there's a few exceptions we can discuss. But do you think that, you know, the bigger scale will be driven by trade, and what do you see for the region here as a potential hub, for example, and for what kind of products?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Marc-Antoine, for this great introduction. Indeed, the book will be published on January the 30th, so it will be available for everyone for free online. Don't worry about it. So one of the things we tackle in the book is how basically hydrogen has changed in terms of geopolitical and geoeconomic nature over the past 5 years. Basically, during the first wave of contemporary national hydrogen strategies, starting in 2013 in Japan and going all the way until 2021, 2022, what we've got is a majority of countries saying hydrogen will be unlocked thanks to international trade at massive scale. And to unlock that, to make it happen, we need to have some kind of major offer-centered policy support. And what we've seen, starting in like the second half of 2022 all the way until now, is that this strategy doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? If you are Germany or France or Belgium, you have hard-to-abate industries in your country. You want to decarbonize them with green hydrogen. Okay, great. You've got two options. You can either bring the green molecule here, the hydrogen, or one of its derivatives, ammonia, green methanol, DME, whatever you like, from some place where you've produced it at cheap, in a place where you've got a lot of land mass availability, and in a place where basically there's a lot of renewables. Okay, great. Second option, you can relocate the assets, the hard-to-abate assets, from Europe to the very same countries we were talking about. And that's basically what's changing now in hydrogen. The more global southern countries, as we call them, have started building hydrogen strategies at national level, starting in 2021, 2022, the more this kind of new narrative has emerged. If I'm Namibia, if I'm Kenya, if I'm Morocco, if I'm Indonesia and the likes, why would I export raw molecules to Europe for Europe to turn these molecules into high added value products? Why would I do that? Doesn't make sense. I want to retain the added value in my country. I want to create local jobs. I want to diversify my economy. I want to de-risk my economy, especially economies like that of the Middle East who need to actually not just decarbonize, but reinvent themselves for the post-fossil fuels world. So based on that, those countries have said, now hydrogen is a green shoring geopolitical factor. And if you want to decarbonize your hard-to-abate industries, don't pick my molecules up and take them all the way to the north. Invest in my country. Build assets there. And in a nutshell, that's the reason why major investors like RDN, for example, now with the Hy24 fund, are basically leading the narrative. They're saying, okay, so there's green shoring on the one hand. There's still people who will need molecules, for example, TotalEnergies, they will need to import molecules to decarbonize their refineries. In Europe, that's a given. And we need to help them both on the infrastructure side and on the equipment side. Why do we need to do that? Because as I said, the first hydrogen national strategies, they were focused on the offer side. And because they were focused on the offer side, like on the chicken side, if you like, no one was really betting on the eggs part of the equation. So what we've realized is that many projects based on very large subsidies, picking up in 2021, 2022, 2023, are now being stalled, not just because of the cost of capital, not just because we don't have the appropriate regulations and whatnot, but also because the demand hasn't picked up at the same pace. So now, what countries are doing is that they're readjusting, realigning their hydrogen strategies to focus more and more and more on the demand, starting with Korea, starting with Japan, starting with Germany. Because if you have demand, basically there's always going to be someone seizing an opportunity here and saying, oh, I need to build that value chain upwards, upstreamward, to actually meet that demand. And that's how you unlock effectively hydrogen. But, and that's, don't worry, I'm going to end there. That's a real geopolitical change. Because if you are focusing on the demand, if you're focusing on the green shoring aspect of things, then basically what we are building is local value chains, more than international trade-based large-scale value chains. And that's really the biggest geopolitical and geoeconomic change of the past couple of years, at least in hydrogen and its derivatives.
Mm. Thank you, Mikaa. The focus on demand is essential because indeed, if you don't have buyers, of course the supply is not going to come. And that is a fundamental energy policy challenge because you have to come with OPEX support measures for energy-intensive industries or hard-to-abate industries, and that is, of course, something that governments are not very used to so far. But there is schemes, carbon contracts for difference, etc. Now, just coming back to the supply side, you mentioned a number of countries that could rise up. How do you see, what advantages do you see for this region here and for the UAE, for example, in this equation?
Well,
because not everyone will be a front runner in that field.
No, definitely. Basically on hydrogen, the beautiful part of hydrogen is that technically anyone could produce green hydrogen anywhere in the world. But the costs question, of course, is important. When we look at the latest study from IRENA regarding the 1.5 degrees pathways, what kind of investment needs that we would need for hydrogen, they've basically said we would need $900 billion of investment all across the hydrogen value chain between 2024 and 2030 to actually build the very first phase of that hydrogen economy model. Who has the money to actually deliver that now? Is it Chile? No. Chile is asking money from the World Bank to develop its hydrogen economy. Is it Europe even? No. We're broke. Is it Japan? They're broke. Is it South Korea? They're not that broke, but at the same time, they only have so much of a market to actually kickstart the whole thing. So basically here, when you're in the Middle East, you've got people who've got money, you've got people who've got available land mass, you've got people who basically also have the availability to invest in all the other things you need to develop hydrogen. The water supply, starting with desalination, which you know all too well. But not just that, the minerals and all of that. And the green shoring aspect is key. If you really want to retain added value then you basically say, look, I have the money to invest in hydrogen. I also have the money to build the industrial assets that are going to use that hydrogen locally. So basically here in the Middle East, whether you look at Oman, whether you look at Saudi Arabia, whether you look at even Kuwait, who's building right now a hydrogen strategy as well, Iraq and the likes, there's people here who can deliver that hydrogen economy. I just want to add one key thing. We are changing, hydrogen is changing the nature of energy geoeconomics, I would argue. And of course, feel free to challenge me on that. We are moving, I would say, from a commodities-based geoeconomics to an assets-based geoeconomics because of hydrogen. Because hydrogen is not just about the commodity, the molecule. It's about all of the assets that you need upward, upstream, downward, downstream to actually make it work. And based on that, the increasingly important factor is not really the OPEX. It's actually the CAPEX. And if you really want to deliver the CAPEX, you need to de-risk the whole industry moving forward. And to de-risk the whole industry moving forward, if you're broke, as Europe or Japan, or if you're not really sure of what you're going to do with hydrogen, like the US, and you want to make sure that you don't miss any opportunity whatsoever, what you need to do is to develop regulatory systems, new ones, new energy reserves that can basically push that market moving forward. So in Europe, we've got that. RED III was mentioned. I could have mentioned here Ifri and many other directives of that sort. CBAM, of course, there's a CBAM effect in hydrogen and many derivatives or use cases of hydrogen. This is a very important factor. And then when you add also the carbon capture, the eSAF, sustainable aviation fuels, and the likes, and so you add the carbon question to rebuild some molecules that we need for e-fuels, then basically you also touch upon the carbon aspect, and therefore you touch upon the forestry, the nature-based solutions aspect, and the likes. So to unlock all of that at the same time, you need the regulatory to be adequate, you need the energy reserves, which China is the only country doing right now when it comes to building hydrogen strategic reserves in the world at the moment. And what you need is investors. Investors, long-term investors who are willing to provide maybe more conservative investors with a platform to invest in nature-based solutions. So Ardian is doing that. They're not the only ones, but they were frontrunners in that, with Hy24 in hydrogen, with the NBS fund when it comes to forestries and carbon management. Basically, you need these kind of actors to then help de-risk not just the economy, but the policymakers as well. The policymakers also need to be de-risked when they take decisions to build these favorable regulatory regimes. So you need to bring all of these people together, and it's a systematic change that needs to happen.
So thank you for that. I think this kind of gathering also helps to move into that direction. I'm now turning to the room. Has anybody any question? I see one question over there. We still have a few minutes left. Yes, please introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you very much for the interesting conversation. My name is Randy Cotier. I'm running the economic service in the south of France. So indeed, hydrogen is a very important matter for us, especially in the Fos area. We have about 2 to 3 gigawatts of projects to contribute to the carbon transition of the industry. And so the question of the cost is really at the heart of the matter, like you said. But like you said, we're broke. And in terms of regulatory framework as well, we don't want to hamper the competitiveness of our industries, right? So how do we go about pushing the demand in the fiscal space that we have? And at the same time, also, I would like to have your view on how far down can we go on the cost curve of hydrogen production. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that is maybe for Stéphane, Michel, and then the others can add to that. And meanwhile, let's gather a second question. Anybody has a second question? So then I have one, if I may, and I might address it to you, Dr. Eyl-Mazegga. Do you plan to have a carbon market in your region, and how advanced are you in this thinking? Because it might be, or it certainly is, one of the drivers of these sustainable investments and of this progressive transition. That will be my next question, if you may. So please, perhaps we start with Stéphane.
Yeah, I'm going to sound perhaps a bit pessimistic and less passionate than my right colleague, because you have two uses of hydrogen. One is for its chemical property, used in fertilizer, used in the steel industry, used in refining, potentially on steel industry. And here, when you look at the hydrogen, it's either blue hydrogen, so actually CCS, because at the end of the day it's gas with CCS, or really something brand new, which is green hydrogen produced with electricity. And if I look at what we are able to do today, the cost of that green hydrogen is probably 3 to 4 times what we call the grey hydrogen, which is the one produced today without capture. Can the society afford that? 4 times is a lot, but yes, it's likely, because at the end of the day, it's just a small component of the full value chain. And in the world today, the only customers that can afford to buy green hydrogen are European refiners because of the regulation. And why so? Because you've got obligation of incorporation, which are not that high, which means that all people, all consumers in Europe are paying a bit for the green hydrogen when they go to the petrol station. And that's why it works. The key question is, can we move from that to an industry, to a situation where you use hydrogen as a power vector, replacing electricity, gas, oil. And when you do that, then you are not talking about 3 times, you are talking about 10 times. And there is no economy that resists to be built on something which is 10 times the price of what you use today. That doesn't work. And that's the very reason why today you don't find customers, as simple as that. The only country which is trying to do that, it's not based on green, it's based on blue, it's Japan and Korea, to blend that in the coal-fired plant, because they don't want to write off their asset. Which, by the way, is a kind of strange, because actually they could build and buy LNG and turn to a CCGT and will do the same, but that's beyond the debate. So the key question, are the one you mentioned, is, do we see a future in abating the cost of green hydrogen significantly? And the big problem is that green hydrogen today is power. So the big question is, where and how can you cut power costs significantly? You've got plenty of countries in the world where you can do that, starting by Middle East, Chile, some of them, Morocco, some of them have been mentioned. And we actually invest on them partly with Adjunct that we finance. But there is a limit clearly to what you can do. And then the problem is that you've got your hydrogen in a country where you can relocate everything you want, but not all the industry of the world will go in Chile or Oman. But there is a limit to that. So you need to transform it and transport it and backcrack it. And that chain today is a quite mature chain, because it's an industry we know, producing ammonia, backcracking ammonia, transporting ammonia. And that's a chain where your ability to cut costs is not that high. So I would be very surprised if actually you can cut the cost of hydrogen by more than 2 or 3. And that's a very big difference with what we know on wind and solar, where the cost curve was just absolutely impressive. But that's done. So that power part of the hydrogen is gone, it's done. And the rest is pretty much mature industry. That's the way we look at it. That doesn't prevent us to invest our share, because we are probably one of the largest investors in hydrogen and one of the largest off-taker. But let's be clear, hydrogen is not, it's an interesting tool. It's not the solution to the transition. To that extent, it will marginally change the geopolitics of power and energy.
Mikaa, 15 seconds, and then Franck, 15 seconds, and then we finish with you on the important question. Please,
we're running out of time, so you have to take my word for it, but don't worry, I've got this book coming so you can verify what I'm saying. Basically, what Stéphane has just described is definitely the situation of hydrogen 2 or 3 years ago. One of the ways to cut down the cost is green shoring. One of the ways to cut down the cost is to massify, and to massify you need to invest on the equipment, not just on the offer. And the third point, which is absolutely key here, very, very important, I want to stress that, is when it comes to hydrogen, as Frank said, it's not a nice-to-have thing. You can't have a net zero economy, let alone a regenerative economy, without hydrogen. So if you don't invest in it now, if you don't help bring the cost curve down, if you don't invest in natural hydrogen in Oman, for example, which basically is twice, half the cost of green hydrogen at the moment, basically, you will never get there. We will never get there.
Frank, 5 seconds.
Yeah, three things. One is 2024 is going to be the hottest year on record after 2023, which was the hottest year on record. There was a Harvard paper earlier in the year that estimated the social cost of carbon as more than $1,000 per ton. So it's not that we cannot afford it, but we're putting the money in the wrong places because we're paying for the mess that we're creating by CO2 emissions. So that is number one. Two, if you look at our proposal for a strategic reserve, and I'm completely with Mikaa, it is not a nice to have. We cannot build a clean energy system without a whole bunch of hydrogen. We can actually ramp up the hydrogen reserves by ramping down the fossil fuel reserves, because you don't need both. I mean, you can do a megawatt hour for megawatt hour, a swap, and you take that, put it on the market, and at least there is a little bit of money. It won't be enough, but it's a start.
Okay, thank you very much. So last word, and then we close. Please, Dr. Eyl-Mazegga, a good news from the region? Oh, please.
So definitely, you can't, back to that point, you cannot look into a net zero strategy without looking into carbon markets, and the UAE is definitely looking into it in a very systematic and pragmatic way. We have already created our carbon registrar system. We are now having a high-level, federal-level committee looking into carbon pricing, and then we are, we're progressing into the carbon market in a very systematic way.
Wow, so we look forward to that. Well done. So,
stay tuned.
Warm round of applause to all of you. Thank you very much. Great discussion. And so to be continued.
Yes.
Because that's just the beginning. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.